The following is a presentation of Surprise Church. El siguiente programa es la presentación de la iglesia Surprise.
Awesome to have you here. We're starting today. If you're new, it's a great day to get started. We're starting a new series called World Without Church. No, we don't dream of a world without church, but we do dream of a world that fills in the voids left where the church does not live up to its potential. And we want to better live up to the potential that Jesus has for us when he dreamed of an organization that he died to start called the Church of Jesus Christ. How many of you have ever seen that TV show, or it's a series called 10,000 Years After People or Humans or something like that? That actually, like, they forecast and they make the digitized animations of the world that will exist and what it will look like thousands and thousands of years after people die. I guess they just assume that we're all going to die. I don't know how soon, but relatively soon. So that's good news. And it just kind of talks about, kind of for morbid thinkers like me that are kind of interested in that kind of thing, what the world would look like. So here's a little snippet of a video of what's going to happen in 10,000 years. So have at it. I don't know if you caught that line that expert said. He said, it's the environment that actually wins. And as I was thinking about this series, it seemed to be a valid question to ask. Is the environment that exists around this community, this organization that Jesus started, is it the same way with us? Is there going to come a time where we kind of remember Jesus' church kind of like we remember, empires that no longer exist, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire? Are we going to remember the church like we remember old pottery that you might find from Native Americans or tribal cultures around the world? Is it going to be a relic at some point of something that no longer exists? Will the environment around the church win? Because I think it's a relevant question because of today's environment. Some places we're going to talk about next week are very hostile to the church. Other places are just ambivalent towards the church or simply have turned a different direction. I think the environment around the church in this culture is that many people identify themselves as spiritual apart from the church. How many of you, by a show of hands, know someone who would say, I'm spiritual, but I don't go to church? I mean, this is our third service since last Wednesday, and everybody, pretty much everybody has said, yeah, of course I know people like that. I work with people like that. I live with people like that. I am like that, So I'm glad you're here today if that's you. But this is a very real part of our environment today. People believe, oftentimes, because of their personal experience, that they are better off trying to be spiritual apart from this spiritual organization. And it is so easy for people who maybe work in the church like me or have a platform to speak or simply who feel strong about their faith and disappointed that others don't share it. It's so easy for us to look down on people who think that way, to say, like, what's wrong with you? That is so arrogant for you to think you can do it better by yourself, or it's so judgmental in reverse to say that the church can't help with that, or you really should. And I think maybe there's some validity to some of those discussions, but I really think that that's a removal of responsibility that belongs to the church, that belongs to Jesus' followers for not living up to something that he wants us to live up to. I think that the church is to blame because in many, many cases, the church and followers of Jesus have gone into hiding from a world that we are really called to reach and love. Many people in this room were raised where they were told that there are places that good church people don't go. There are things that good church people don't do that aren't inherently sinful. And so we were raised in many cases with this sense of Christians don't do certain things because we are good Christians. And they're meant not necessarily just to please God, but to separate us from people that we're sure are bad. So we can't go to dances or movies or whatever. And we create these kind of non-biblical lists of do's and don'ts in order to differentiate us from people who do, because we don't. We also don't go certain places because good Christian people don't go to that establishment, don't go to hang out with people like that. And it's very, very bizarre because Jesus was always in trouble for who he hung out with and where. Somewhere along the line, the church missed that, and many sectors of the church missed that and started to do what the people that Jesus was criticizing were doing, which was to differentiate, to hide, to reject the world that Jesus died for, and instead create our own little Christian enclaves where we have a cliques of people who are more self-righteous than self-giving. Jesus had very, very little time left by the time you get around to Matthew chapter 16. If you've ever been around a loved one who had very, very little time left, you know that what they do and what they say is either desperate because they just want to blow off the last bit of steam before they die, or in most cases, very, very calculated. If you're told you have 6 months to live, 3 months to live, 3 weeks to live, your family switches gears. Jobs fall by the wayside, chores fall by the wayside, because everybody wants to be in the same room with you. Your words and your activities, although probably limited by whatever medical condition you're facing, are going to be designed around maximizing the time you have left so that when you die, you can say, I'm so glad I did those specific things before I died. I got those essentials accomplished. Jesus, by Matthew 16, knows that his time is very, very short. And so it's so helpful to watch very closely what he does with the time he has left. One of the things that he does with the time he has left is he goes to a place called Caesarea Philippi. It was a city, it was a 32-mile round-trip walk. Anybody ever walk 32 miles before? I mean, you could go to Disney World, and you're not probably walking 32 miles in a day. You're walking 10 to 15 max. 32 miles, you don't do that by accident. You could go to the Kirkwood Mall and you could just do and there's people that do that. They just go to the mall not to shop. They go there to walk, and you can tell by the look on their faces. They're distracted by nothing. Not even Victoria's Secret is going to distract these guys. They're just boom. But they're not getting 32 miles in. They're not getting 32 miles in. For Jesus to get 32 miles off the beaten path, there and back to this city, something is going on. This city also is a very unique city. So the fact that he would go there is very significant. That's a picture of a temple built on the outskirts of town, with the town is built against this large rock. Very distinctive, high outcropping of a rock on the backside of the city where this temple was built. Very religious part of the city. The city itself was very spiritual. And this is not like Surprise Church. So this is going to just make you raise your eyebrows, maybe one eyebrow. It's a little weird. I promise not to scare anybody. But their spirituality included prostitution and bizarre sensual rituals with animals. That's as far as I'm going to go today. Don't worry. That's as far as we're going to go. You can don't Google it. That'll actually make it worse for you. Find a history book somewhere. Don't Google that. And one of the specific statues was a god named Pan, and he was a fertility god. And Pan had a removable appendage. Again, I'm going to let you imagine as far south as if you want to go with that. I'm just going to let you go. And that would be removed and paraded throughout the city during major festivals and parades. Think like Pride Parade on steroids. This is bizarre stuff, okay? Now, they also had on the outskirts of town, as you saw, the Rock of the Gods, that whole huge shelf there that just shot up out of the ground. They thought that was kind of this divine kind of connection, this huge rock. And in that rock was just cut these kind of oval-like enclaves with flat bottoms where they would place different statues and relics and idols where they would worship to these gods and place offerings upon that little makeshift altar. You can still see those altars carved out of the rock. And then one part of the rock, very distinctly, was a cave that would, it was a big cave that went straight into the rock, and at the time, a stream flowed out of it. Now, the stream no longer flows out of it because there was an earthquake in the 18th century that redirected the direction of the stream that came out of the mountain, and it goes a different direction as it exits the rock now. But at the time, the cave was the source or the mouth of the stream as it came out of the building. The ancient mind in that context saw water as connected to the underworld, especially water that came out of the ground. And so they thought that the stream flowed from hell. They thought the stream, they talked about the stream coming out of the underworld, which they called Hades or hell. And so the cave mouth they called the gates of hell. Jesus has a few days to live, and he decides to go to hell. He decides to go to the rock of the gods with bizarre practices, all kinds of pagan religious sensuality involved in the religious systems. He decides to go upon this very spot before he dies. Like, why? He was told by the rabbis at the time, good Jewish boys never go there. This was like Las Vegas. This is Sin City. You do not want to go to this place because if you get involved in what they're doing there, you're going to come home with stories that you just can't tell. And don't go there. Don't go to Caesarea Philippi. But before Jesus dies, this religious leader brings his disciples to this very spot. And maybe some of the stuff they saw was unbelievable. Maybe what they saw was detestable. But he still went. Matthew chapter 16 kind of goes into what was going on there. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? That's the name he calls himself, the Son of Man. They replied, some say, and all these guys, by the way, are dead. So they think Jesus, some people talk about Jesus as some resurrected former hero of the biblical Jewish faith. Some say John the Baptist, most recent hero who's died. Others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Now, it's really easy to talk about God. It's very easy to talk about religion. It's easy to talk about church and denominations. It's another level up to talk to God. It's another level up to talk to people when you're just really trying to sort out what God's will for your lives is. Jesus turns and looks at them and says, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? Now, one of the disciples, Simon Peter, was one of those guys that you just like to hang around because he is a shoot first, aim second kind of guy. He says things, sometimes he's just totally off and he gets criticized for it. Sometimes he puts his foot in his mouth, but sometimes he's just spot on because he's not afraid to just let it out there and put it out there. And so Peter, Simon Peter, he calls him, answers, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. If their journey has reached the mount, the rock of the gods, they are standing all around dead gods. They're all around them are these bizarre, sometimes grotesque statues and practices of people just desperately trying somehow to connect to a God that they don't know, that has not been revealed to them, that has not been explained to them. And they grew up in this culture where this is just how people connect with God. And it was bizarre, it was tragic, it was broken, but they're trying somehow to connect with this God. And Jesus chooses to go right there to say, who do you say that I am? And when and Peter stands and says, you're the living version of this. You're the pursuit of God that leads to life. You're the living God. Following you is not a dead end. You're the Son of the living God. Now, watch how Jesus congratulates Peter. He does not pat him on the head and say, look how smart you are. I wish everybody was as good as you. Watch how he affirms what Peter said without affirming Peter. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. So human beings have no part in what you just said, but my Father in heaven. This is one of the most freeing verses in the Bible when we think about going out and sharing our faith with the world. This gives me permission to be patient and humble, because whatever I know about God, whatever I believe about God, I can take no credit for it. I might have opened my Bible, I might have gone to seminary, but God has opened my eyes. Because there's a whole lot of people who are a whole lot smarter than I am, that know a whole lot more about all kinds of things, that think Jesus is a joke. And I can't look at them and say, if you were just a little bit smarter, if I could just beat you in an argument, if I could just use guilt, and I'm not totally against guilt. In its proper form, guilt is real nice. But it's never really brought someone to Jesus. It opens the door to experience Jesus' forgiveness, but it's never going to win someone's heart over to Jesus. Before he dies, He reminds people that when you get it right, it's my gift to you, not your gift to me. And so as you're relating to your family, your friends, your kids, your spouse, your coworkers, your boss, your neighbors, do they see someone who knows that the mere fact that they know Jesus' name is the only thing separating them from people who stand around and worship dead gods as a lifestyle? God in his grace just decided to set me free. And that is so humbling. Otherwise, I'd be out there doing whatever they did in the streets of Caesarea Philippi or wherever else today. He just decided to let me be a part of his movement. It's humbling. That means you don't have to win an argument to win someone's heart. You don't have to beat someone down to win their heart. That means that you don't have to shame someone, guilt someone, sound smarter or better than someone. It simply means that you're willing to open up your home, open up your life, open up your story, and show a sincere interest in theirs. To meet someone on their turf, and when the time is right to love and serve them like family, you do it. For the opportunity to simply share what God has allowed you to see and know in ways that allow them to understand it. If God chooses to open their eyes. It's the most freeing verse for people who feel like, yeah, I'm supposed to do something for God, but it oftentimes comes out in ways that push people away from church, even when they're pressing towards spirituality. Jesus now adds to this and talks about the movement that he's going to build on what Peter just said. He says, and I tell you that you are Peter. Peter's name means rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. People have debated for centuries since the very beginning about what this verse means. Many people have said, well, this, if you have a Roman Catholic background, for instance, this verse points to the human authority, the leadership that Jesus wants to have over his church. That not just anybody can lead the church, it's one person designated by Jesus who designated one person throughout history. The line of succession coming back from Peter the person to the people that followed Peter. People who protested against that, known as the Protestants, who said, you know what, that doesn't really square with what we think that verse means because there have been all kinds of failures in that person throughout history. At different times in history, there are multiple people claiming to be that person, and it introduces some issues of fallibility that I don't think are quite what Jesus was referring to here. This can't just be the person that Jesus is going to build his church around. It has to be the statement that Peter made, that Jesus is going to build his church around. It has to be Jesus is the Son of the living God, and believing that is what Jesus builds his church on. And I think that's true too. I think certainly Jesus is talking about people, but I think more he's talking about a movement around what Peter said. But even then, something's missing. Because we can whitewash this whole story and just pull this verse out of context and say, we're going to build a church full of people who believe in Jesus. And that's good. But what often isn't involved when we talk about the nature of the church is where they were standing. That Jesus, to say what he said here, took a 32-mile, farther than a marathon walk right before he dies with this much time left in his 33-year life, and he decided to stand around grotesque statues with people worshiping dead gods as a lifestyle on the rock of the gods outside of the place where he grew up that was safe and comfortable, where good Jewish boys and girls never go, where good church people don't go. And that is where he said he's going to build his church, on that rock. You miss that, you miss the whole point. Today at 2 o'clock, a bunch of folks from Surprise started out with just guys, but then the girls were protesting, and they said, we want to be a part of this too. So they let girls in, which was good. I think it was a good idea to let the girls in because they're fun too. We're going down to Laughing Sun Brewing. We're going to hang out there. Come one, come all. Friends welcome, and I've invited people to that in the past who would never go to church. But they're so impressed by a church that's willing to go where many won't. Some people who struggle with addiction aren't going to have beer. They make their own root beer. It's amazing. Some people are going to have a pint and just chill out and talk, play Scrabble, whatever gals do at a pub, normal people do. And that's what human beings do. That's normal. And for a church to say we won't do that because good church people don't go to pubs, first of all, that's insane. No, there's a lot of really, really good people. In fact, I met Nick at Laughing Sun, one of the guys helping on our security and our media team. Many of you wouldn't be here if somebody didn't go somewhere where good church people weren't supposed to go and invite someone that good church people weren't so supposed to invite. So I'm so glad that they didn't stop with me or you when we were applying those standards. And we're going to be there, and we're not going to do anything wrong. We're not going to do anything simple, but we're going to do what normal people do when they have fun, socialize, and it's refreshing. And no one's going to feel any pressure to beat anybody in an argument. No one's going to feel any pressure to know a certain amount of Scripture. We're simply going to just be normal human beings doing what normal human beings do. And yet we also know that driving it behind the whole thing is a God who says, yeah, you can go there. Because I build my churches at pubs. I build my churches in workplaces. I build my churches in neighborhoods and homes. I build my church everywhere because I am God everywhere, and there is no other way. And the reason we know that the context is so significant here is because of what Jesus said next. On this rock I will build my church. And then he says, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Now, many churches have misread this to say, okay, the gates of hell are attacking us. Hell is attacking the church. The world is bad. Church equals good. World equals bad. And so they ended up building churches that look like fortresses. Do you see the architecture behind most of our churches? It tends to look like a military installation, doesn't it? You can almost see armed guards on top of that castle-like tower there. A stairway and a door that looks like you'd have to have a battering ram to get in. Most of our churches are built like fortresses. And I'm not taking away from that beauty of that architecture. I'm not saying that there isn't something cool and God-honoring about the beauty. So I'm not bashing church buildings and all. Many, many beautiful church buildings in town here. And I think God is honored by that. But at the same time, that fortress mentality has been a part of our thinking for too long as Christians. That we are on our defensive. That our job as Christians is to huddle behind our walls, get together on Sundays, and talk about, man, when do you think God is going to destroy everybody else and send them to hell? And we have these golden tickets called fire insurance that we carry as Christians, that someday we're not going to go to hell, and they are. Yippee! And some churches don't mind getting smaller and smaller and smaller because it just means that they're more of an elite group being saved out of this awful world. But as I read this passage, you go back to the words, gates don't attack anything. Have you ever seen like a dramatization of any medieval battle where a city is being attacked? Or Lord of the Rings, when any city is being attacked or a fortress is being attacked? The bad guys are doing the attacking because the good guys, they don't need to attack. And they go up against the gates with these monstrous rams, like battering rams, to destroy the gates. And if the gates can hold, the city is safe. If the gates can't overcome, the city is lost. Who is behind the gates in Jesus' analogy here? Is the church behind the gates, or is the church attacking the gates? Hell is on the defensive. Darkness is on the defensive. Brokenness, abuse, and dysfunction and addiction are on the defensive. The church, he seems to indicate here, is the force that's actually advancing. And he travels 32 miles into a place that good church people weren't supposed to go to make that point. He stands right there in front of the cave where the stream was supposedly coming out of the underworld. Not that he believed that was actually happening, but he was playing into their understanding of reality and saying, even the gates of hell are not going to withstand the force that I will die to create and unleash into the world. And we are going to build churches in places like this, and the gates of hell itself will not be able to withstand the onslaught of the loving, peaceful, faithful followers of Jesus that are going to be unleashed into the world when this happens. Even the gates of hell won't prevail against it. We're not on the defensive. We are on the offensive, Jesus says. The picture on the right is a picture of the forces invading Normandy. 3,500 warships, all kinds of other crafts, including civilian crafts in the ocean, in the channel, coming across to storm Normandy Beach. And you can bet Hitler was not excited about that. And the beach, despite the serious loss of life, was not able to withstand the advancing forces that were trying to bring peace to Europe. And that, to me, is a lot more like what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about violence. He's talking about the light of Jesus coming into a dark world. We're not on the defensive, Jesus says. We're on the offensive. So a church is a force, not a fortress. The world is without church then when we hide rather than when we invade. So my question then is, will the environment win? Will the environment around us erode our sense of identity to the point where we exist for people until they no longer need us? Where we exist simply to give people a place to hide from an awful world or try to put themselves above others who don't get it, like we do? Or is there something about us that's so much bigger than that, so much better than that, something imbued by Jesus that is so much fuller than that, that long after every fad, every trend, every national boundary, every ethnic barrier, every political barrier have dissolved into the past, this one thing will endure? In the video about 10,000 years after humans, the expert talks about some exceptions of things that may still be here after all that time. He says there are a few exceptions.
Carved out of solid granite in an ecologically stable place. The only enemy it has is wind-driven pellets of rain. I think that Mount Rushmore may be around 100,000 years, possibly 200. Possibly even in time to be looked at in awe by the earliest of our replacements.
I don't know if you've ever been to Mount Rushmore's backside. It's fascinating. Don't get too close. It's a little weird to get too close, but the backside's cool. The front side, of course, is what it's most famous for. There's no postcards for the backside, but it's a cool thing to see. It's a really cool thing to see these four figures so memorialized that their faces were chiseled into granite mountains. And this thinker is saying to himself, 10,000 years, when every other semblance of humankind has kind of faded, it would be excavated underneath rock or maybe found in some sort of fossilized way. This is going to probably be there 100 or 200,000 years because of how permanent it was created to be. Jesus stands with his disciples in a place full of practices that I bet those who practiced them and believed them thought would be there forever. And he talks about something new that was going to be able to incorporate and invade into all kinds of different cultures all around the world for thousands of years and find a home, a place to grow and thrive, cross language boundaries, cross cultural boundaries, cross generational boundaries. And he stands on the rock of the gods in front of the gates of hell, and he says, I am going to build my eternal family right here on this rock. Invite the band forward. And he says the gates of hell won't prevail against it. They're not going to like it because they're going to find themselves over and over again in more and more places on the defensive as people wake up, as God opens people's eyes to the reality of God's presence, power, and love in the world. People are going to wake up and say, you know what, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm not going to pursue this vision for life anymore. I'm going to go this direction with these people because this is real life. I have been following dead-end pursuits, following dead-end gods of one kind or another, and I see a direction for my life playing out with Jesus as the hero and his people as my teammates and my family, and there's no going back. As you leave today, I want to invite you to be the church. I don't know what that looks like for you. It doesn't look like winning an argument, I can promise you that. It looks more like Jesus dying on the cross for the sake of the world. It looks like loving and sacrificing and serving and telling the truth when you need to and when you get to. I don't know what it looks like in your marriage or your home. I don't know what it looks like in your workplace, but I know it happens. Jesus says after a 32-mile round trip that it's possible even in Sin City, so I guarantee you it's possible in your life and every single corner. And the gates of hell might look pretty strong. They might, in that relationship or in that place, in that building, in that part of town, it might look like, you know what, we might as well not even try. But Jesus says that those gates are weaker than you think because the army is stronger than you think. And it's not really, at the end of the day, us fighting at all. It's God fighting for us. Hell doesn't want us anywhere near its gates. He didn't want Jesus anywhere near Caesarea Philippi. He would have been so much happier if Jesus would have stood in a Jewish temple in Jerusalem, in Galilee, anywhere but here. Because if they start to believe that the church can build life here, that lives can transform here, then I'm not going to be able to contain them to their churches and their synagogues and their borders and their boundaries. It's going to get out like an infection. It's going to get out like a plague, and no family is safe. No neighborhood is safe. No nation is safe from this message that threatened emperors, that scared rulers, because this message caused people to go from death to life. You stand and claim this message for yourself. As you leave, there's going to be postcards on the table, little flyers that invite people to experience Easter with us. I ordered an extra 1,000 this year because I think that there are at least 2,000 people that need a personal invitation. Would you grab a stack for your daily walks through town or your office or your workplace? Just plan to invite as many people as you can to experience the greatest news the world has ever seen that can even thrive in places like Caesarea Philippi and your workplace and school, because it's the best news the world's ever heard. Let's pray. Father, thank you that some things will never fade. That when we build our homes and when we build our marriages and we parent our kids upon the rock of Jesus Christ, we are building on the only sure foundation that exists. So pry our hands and pry our hearts from priorities and practices that do not keep us alive, that will not sustain our lives and our relationships and our work, and instead fix our hearts on the one thing that's going to be around even when Mount Rushmore is covered with moss and crumbles into the ground. The eternal family with walls, Scripture says, that go up into the sky, with gates that don't need to be closed because there's nothing to hide from. The city of God that you're building right here. As we sing about stepping out of the boat and pursuing your mission for our lives, God, I pray that something happens in our hearts as we sing, and we leave with a courage and a passion to live a humble, patient, loving life so that people can experience light in dark places. Be with us as we sing and as we go. In Jesus' name.